library.
Stop for a moment. Before you open the next tab, before you scroll again, before you fill this empty minute with something else, stay here. Because what I'm about to tell you in the next few minutes, you may have already been feeling without being able to name it. That fatigue that doesn't come from lack of sleep, that fog that settles over your thoughts in the middle of the day, even though you haven't done anything particularly heavy, that strange inner lethargy, that missing momentum, that sensation that something in you that should be burning is no longer really burning. If you recognize yourself in those words, then I'm asking you to listen until the end, because the thief is silent, and he has been operating for a long time. Chapter 1. The Silent Thief. We live in an age where pleasure is available on demand. Never in the history of humanity has a human being had access from the palm of their hand to stimulation so intense, so immediate, so unlimited. And pornography has become one of the most accessible, most consumed, and most normalized forms of that stimulation. We rarely talk about it, we laugh about it sometimes, we mention it with a slight awkwardness and move on, but we almost never talk about what it actually does to the brain, to your motivation, to your ability to feel pleasure in the rest of your life, to your capacity to wake up in the morning with a genuine desire to build something. This script is not a moral sermon. I am not here to tell you what is right or wrong. I am here to show you something that neurology, psychology, and thousands of testimonies converge to describe with disarming clarity. Pornography consumed regularly rewires the brain, and that rewiring touches precisely the circuits of motivation, concentration, and ambition. Not metaphorically, biologically. Imagine a fire that once burned in you, perhaps in childhood or adolescence, that flame that pushed you towards something, towards projects, towards dreams, towards challenges, towards the idea of becoming someone. Do you remember that feeling, that energy that wanted to be spent, to create, to overcome? Now imagine that a subtle diversion of that energy began operating so gently that you never saw it coming, that the flame is still there somewhere, but that it burns in a direction that doesn't build you, that doesn't nourish you, that consumes you without producing anything in return. That is what we are going to talk about, the fire and what diverts it. Chapter 2. The Chemistry of Desire. What dopamine is hiding from you. To understand what happens in the brain of a regular consumer of pornography, we need to start by understanding dopamine, not in the way it's often imagined as a simple pleasure molecule. That reduction is too convenient and creates profound misunderstandings. Dopamine is not pleasure. Dopamine is anticipation. It is the fuel of the quest, of the search, of the effort oriented towards a reward, and that is precisely why it sits at the heart of all motivation, all ambition, all forms of sustained concentration. When you set yourself a difficult goal, when you begin working on a project that excites you, when you take on a challenge that slightly exceeds your current abilities, it is dopamine that fuels that rising energy. It is your dopaminergic circuits that say, go ahead, keep going, it's possible, it will be worth something. It is those circuits that keep you focused for hours on something difficult because you feel, viscerally, that the effort leads somewhere. Now, here is what pornography does to that system. It floods it, literally. Neuroimaging studies show that consuming pornographic content triggers a dopamine release of an intensity comparable to that observed with certain drugs, not because sex itself is dangerous, but because what the brain perceives in pornography is not a real experience. It is an artificial construction, an assemblage of stimuli optimized to trigger the maximum response with the minimum effort from the consumer. The human being evolved with a reward system calibrated for scarcity. Food was hard to find, a sexual partner was difficult to win, the reward came after the effort, and it is precisely that space between effort and reward that sculpted the circuits of human motivation. That space is the cradle of ambition, perseverance, creativity. Pornography eliminates that space entirely. It delivers the maximum reward instantly, without effort, without risk, without friction. And the brain, faced with this repeated flooding, does the only thing it can do to protect itself. It adapts. It reduces the number of dopamine receptors. It lowers its baseline sensitivity. It recalibrates its stimulation threshold upward. In simple terms, now it takes more to feel as much, and everything that was once a source of ordinary pleasure, the morning coffee, a conversation with a friend, the satisfaction of having made progress on a project, all of that becomes slightly dull, slightly insufficient, slightly disappointing. Not dramatically, just enough to blunt that momentum you no longer quite know where it went.
Chapter 3. The Fog, when the brain can no longer focus. There is a phenomenon that many people who have reduced or stopped their consumption of pornography describe with troubling precision. They talk of a lifting of the fog, a rediscovered clarity, a returning ability to concentrate gradually, as if a window that had been opaque with condensation were slowly clearing. This testimony comes up so often across such different cultures from such diverse people that it deserves serious attention. Brain fog is not a romantic metaphor. It is a functional description of what happens when the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for analytical thinking, planning, decision-making, and impulse control, is underperforming. And one of the most direct causes of this underperformance is the chronic hyperstimulation of the primitive reward circuits. Here is how to understand it. The brain is an organ with limited resources. When deep evolutionary regions linked to primal drives are in chronic overactivation, the more recent, more complex regions, those that allow you to think clearly across a 10-year horizon, to elaborate a strategy, to sustain attention on a difficult task, those regions operate with less available energy. It is as if part of your mental bandwidth were constantly occupied in the background, processing something you did not choose to process. People who regularly consume pornography report difficulty entering a state of flow, that state of total concentration where time disappears and productivity reaches its peak. They report an increased tendency toward procrastination, not out of fundamental laziness, but because the brain has been trained to prefer rapid stimulation over sustained effort. They report difficulty finding satisfaction in activities that take time before bearing fruit, reading a book, learning a skill, developing a project over several months. This is not a lack of willpower, it is neurology. A brain recalibrated for instant gratification will physiologically struggle to maintain engagement toward delayed rewards. And in a world where almost every goal that truly matters, health, career, deep relationships, a mastery of a discipline, demands exactly that capacity to work for fruits you will only see in 6 months or 6 years, that recalibration is an invisible but very real handicap. The fog is not in your head, it is in your neurons, and it has an identifiable cause. Chapter 4. Emasculated ambition, when the fire goes out. Talk to me about ambition, not the cold, calculating ambition that looks like greed in disguise, but that inner flame that says, I want to build something, I want to leave a mark, I want to become better than I am today, I want to surpass myself. That flame is biologically linked to the very same dopaminergic circuits we just discussed, and it feeds on tension, on unsatisfied desire, on energy that seeks to transform itself into creation.
The great spiritual and philosophical traditions knew this intuitively. Most cultures that produced great artistic, intellectual, or martial achievements valued a form of continence, a retention of energy, a channeling of desire towards something else than its immediate satisfaction. The Stoics, monks across different traditions, high-level athletes who practice abstinence before major competitions. This was not superstition, it was an empirical understanding of something that neuroscience confirms today. Testosterone plays a role here that cannot be ignored. It is not simply a sexual hormone, it is a hormone of behavior, of risk-taking, of competitiveness, of motivation to dominate challenges. Studies show a complex relationship between regular pornography consumption and testosterone dynamics, with some research suggesting effects on receptor sensitivity and on the hormonal rhythms that regulate vital energy. But beyond hormones, it is behavior that matters. The habit of satisfying immediately, of refusing to tolerate the tension of unsatisfied desire, of escaping discomfort toward rapid relief, that habit migrates. It does not stay contained in one compartment of your life. A brain trained to flee discomfort will physiologically struggle to persevere in the gym when it hurts, will struggle to keep working on a project when it becomes complex and frustrating, will struggle to hold a difficult conversation in a relationship rather than avoiding it. Pornography is not an isolated problem in one compartment of your life. It reconfigures a way of being in relation to difficulty. And difficulty, as you know if you have ever accomplished anything truly important, is the mandatory path toward everything that is worth something. There is something particularly insidious in the way this erosion of ambition operates. It is gradual, imperceptible. You do not notice the day you start wanting less. You do not precisely notice the moment when your dreams begin to feel less urgent, less real, less burning. You simply notice that one morning, faced with something that once would have thrilled you, you feel mostly tired and a vague desire to postpone. And you call it maturity or realism or simply growing up. But sometimes it is something else. Sometimes it is the silent thief who has done his work.
Chapter 5. Desensitization. When the real world becomes dull. There is a phenomenon in neurology called tolerance. You probably know it in other contexts. The coffee you used to drink in 1 cup that gave you energy, today you need 2 or 3 to feel the same effect. The alcohol that once relaxed you in small quantities, today the same amounts produce a lesser effect. This phenomenon is not a weakness of character. It is biology. The brain adapts to what it is given in abundance. It down-regulates, as neuroscientists say. It reduces its response to maintain balance. Pornography creates the same process of tolerance, but in a particularly central domain of human experience, sexuality and desire. Over time and with regular consumption, the content that once sufficed to generate the desired response no longer suffices. The brain needs novelty, increasing intensity, ever more extreme stimuli to reach the same level of activation. It is a documented, consistent process that follows very precise patterns across the testimonies of people who have honestly examined their own consumption. But here is what is discussed less often, and which is most important. This desensitization does not stop at the gates of the digital world. It spills into reality. A real partner, with all the singular and imperfect beauty of a genuine human being, begins to seem less exciting than a virtual construction optimized to trigger the maximum response. The ordinary pleasures of life, the satisfaction of a shared meal, the joy of a deep conversation, the pride of having accomplished something difficult, begin to seem dull compared to a digital stimulation that instantly delivers an artificial intensity that real life cannot reproduce. This desensitization of the real world is perhaps the most serious and least often named consequence, because it doesn't just touch sexuality, it touches the general capacity to feel wonder, to feel, to be present to the texture of existence.
And that sensitivity, progressive desensitization, blunts it, silently, inexorably, until one day you notice that you are there but not really there, that you do things but don't really live them, that you exist but no longer really feel alive. Chapter 6. The Connections You Can No Longer Build. Human connection is one of the most fundamental needs of our species, not the need for sex, which is a dimension of it, but the need for genuine connection, that feeling of being known, of being seen, of being in the presence of someone who truly meets you, and the capacity to build that connection, to tolerate it, to care for it, is a skill. Like all skills, it develops with practice and atrophies with neglect. Pornography creates a substitution. It offers the illusion of connection, the simulacrum of intimacy, the form without the substance. And like any substitution, it can progressively reduce both the desire and the capacity to seek the original. Why engage in the complexity, the vulnerability, the unpredictability of a real human relationship when a risk-free connection is available at any moment, without effort, without the possibility of rejection, without the inevitable friction that accompanies every real relationship? Men and women who consume pornography regularly report consistent relational patterns. A difficulty staying present with a real partner, the mind elsewhere, in an unconscious comparison. A tendency to objectify, to see real people through the lens of constructed representations that have nothing to do with the reality. A performance anxiety that replaces the joy of shared presence. And paradoxically, a growing loneliness because the substitution never truly nourished what it promised to nourish. But the effects go even further than the romantic sphere. Pornography, by training the brain to prefer frictionless stimulation, can also affect the capacity to invest in deep friendships, in professional collaborations, in any relationship that demands time, patience, tolerance for ambiguity and for the imperfections of others. Because a real relationship is a slow and complex thing. It demands exactly the kind of inner availability and tolerance for discomfort that the habit of instant gratification has progressively eroded. And there is something particularly painful about this reality. People who suffer from this pattern don't see it clearly. They feel the loneliness without identifying the cause. They sense that something is off in their relationships without being able to point to what it is. They question their capacity to truly love, to truly commit, without realizing that it may be less a question of deep nature than a habit that has progressively reduced their capacity to connect with the real world.
Chapter 7. The Stolen Identity. Who would you be if this habit did not exist? Here is a question I am asking you with all the tenderness and all the frankness I can bring. Who would you be if this habit did not exist? Not who you would be in an abstract, idealized sense, but concretely, practically. What would your daily energy look like? Where would that hour, those 2 hours, sometimes more, that you dedicate to this ritual that empties you more than it fills you, where would it go? Toward what would that unsatisfied tension, that desire seeking to transform itself into something, be directed? Pornography occupies space, not only time, though time is already considerable when one adds it up honestly. It occupies mental space, emotional space, energetic space, and that space in your life is finite. What is given to one thing cannot be given to another. Every minute spent in that direction is a minute not spent writing, building, learning, creating, having conversations that matter, moving towards something that would truly resemble who you are. There is also a question of narrative identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are. We are beings of narrative. What we do regularly, secretly, with our time and energy, eventually becomes part of who we believe we are. And the secret has a cost. carrying something you cannot share freely, that you minimize in front of others, that you justify internally with arguments you don't find entirely convincing. That weight consumes energy. You no longer have to build. Many people who go through what the community calls a reboot, that period of voluntary abstinence, report something that surprises them: the gradual emergence of desires they had forgotten, old passions returning, curiosities waking up, a new appetite for projects that truly matter to them, that had been put on standby without them quite realizing it. It is as if a part of them had been in hibernation, and that part begins to wake up as the fog lifts. Who would you be if the energy you dedicate to this was transformed into something? Not necessarily something grand or spectacular, perhaps simply something true, something that in 5 years would allow you to look back and say that you lived in the direction of what you truly wanted to become. That question deserves to be asked, and it deserves an honest answer. Chapter 8. The Way Back. What neuroscience tells us about healing. Here is the good news, and I want you to receive it fully, because what preceded was difficult to hear, and you deserve to hear what follows. The human brain is endowed with an extraordinary property that neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. The brain changes. It is not fixed. It reconfigures itself based on what we give it, what we ask of it, what we expose it to. What has been modified can be remodified. What has been desensitized can regain its sensitivity. What has been extinguished can be reignited. Neuroplasticity is the science of hope, and in the context we are discussing, it means something very concrete. People who have stopped or drastically reduced their consumption of pornography after a period of reset that generally lasts from a few weeks to several months, depending on the individual, report measurable changes in their daily lives. A better capacity for concentration, a return of motivation, the return of simple pleasures to which they had become indifferent, a new appetite for projects that truly matter to them, a greater presence in their relationships, a new appetite for projects that truly matter to them. This is not a magical promise. It is not an overnight transformation. The way back takes time, precisely because the brain takes time to recalibrate. There are often difficult periods, surges of discomfort, powerful temptations, days when nothing seems to change. This is the normal process of any deep neurological change. The neural pathways associated with an old habit do not disappear instantly. They atrophy gradually from lack of activation, while new pathways are reinforced. The science of habits teaches us that a habit is not suppressed, it is replaced. And this is perhaps the most important point of this chapter. The way back is not a path of pure deprivation, a white-knuckle willpower effort that lasts forever. It is a path of reorientation, redirecting the energy toward something else, toward physical challenges, toward artistic creation, toward learning that fully mobilizes the brain, toward relationships that demand presence, toward anything that activates the reward circuits through genuine effort rather than an artificial shortcut. And in that space of reorientation, something remarkable can begin to happen. The tension that was once channeled toward escape finds a new outlet. It becomes fuel. It becomes that creative restlessness, that need to express, that desire to build, which is at the origin of all great human achievements. The fire has not gone out. It was waiting to be redirected.
Chapter 9. The Choice. What you build with the fire. We have arrived at the end of this journey, and I want to close not with a list of practical advice, not with a 7-step program, but with something more fundamental,
an invitation to a reflection that only you can conduct in the sincerity of what you know about yourself. You now have a clearer understanding of what happens biologically in a brain regularly exposed to this type of stimulation. You understand the mechanism of dopamine, the desensitization, the erosion of motivation, the fog over concentration, the atrophy of ambition. These words are not judgments. They are descriptions of processes, and processes, unlike moral judgments, have practical solutions. The real question that arises now is deeper than stop or continue. It is, toward what do you want to direct your vital energy? Because you have a finite amount of energy, attention, desire, and time, and each choice about how you use it is a vote for the person you are becoming. Not a definitive vote, not an irrevocable vote, but a vote repeated day after day that ultimately shapes something as real and as permanent as character. There are men and women who have gone through exactly what you may be going through, who found themselves in that fog, in that inexplicable fatigue, in that missing momentum, and who made the connection, who chose, not perfectly, not in one fell swoop, but progressively, with relapses and new beginnings, to redirect that energy, and who testify with a consistency that deserves to be heard to a transformation they would not have believed possible, not only in their relation to sexuality, but in their way of being in the world, in their drive, in their clarity, in the quality of their relationships, in their capacity to want something and go after it. I am not asking you to blindly believe in this transformation. I am simply asking you to take the question seriously, to look at your own life honestly. Do I recognize myself in what has been described? Is there a connection I have not yet dared to make? And if so, what do I want to do with this knowledge? The fire is still there. It always has been. It is looking for a direction, and the direction you choose, no one but you can choose it for you. But there is one thing I know with certainty. A human being who has regained access to their own fire, who has decided to build something with the energy that was being wasted, that human being changes. Not overnight, but they change, and the world around them changes with them. You deserve to be someone who burns in the right direction, someone whose energy creates rather than dissipates, someone who wakes up in the morning with something to build, someone whose motivation is as clean and as powerful as wind at altitude, before anything has diverted it from its natural course. This choice belongs to you, and it begins now.